I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today I'm driving the BMW 5 Series. Subscribers will know, and I really encourage you to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our videos, that I've already driven the 530e, which is a petrol-electric version of the new 5 Series that's really worth close consideration. But the pair that I've brought along today are the engines that people will really buy in bulk. On my left in silver is the 530i, which somewhat confusingly is a 2-litre turbo petrol 4-cylinder these days, whereas on my right in the brown is the 530d, which more conventionally is a 3-litre straight 6 diesel. And it really is just the 2 cylinders plus an extra $11,000 for the 530d that separate this pair, because both of them are fitted out with the 5 Series luxury line configuration, which means a more conservative look with toned down bumpers, less overt wheels, and plenty of chrome trim. However, for no extra cost, you can have either of these cars fitted out with an M Sport package, which adds more aggressive front and rear fascias, M Sport wheels, and black trim, which replaces most of that chrome. But in quite a surprising turn, the 5 Series now concentrates on ultra comfort and refinement inside, rather than the overt sporting persona behind the wheel of previous generations of this car. So just how nice is the new BMW 5 Series inside? Well, let's jump in and find out. You enter the 5 Series easily with comfort access on all 4 doors as standard, and then you hop down into this fairly low slung vehicle and into a fantastic seat. Although this particular seat isn't what you get as standard, this is the optional comfort seat fitted out in what BMW calls exclusive Napa leather, and this is the white colour. You can get the Napa leather seat in white, black or mocha brown, as we've got over there in the 530i. And with the standard Dakota leather, which isn't quite as supple, you can also get sand and tan combinations as well. This 530d is trimmed in this absolutely beautiful burled walnut finish, and I really recommend that if you want to really max out that luxury factor in this car. However, you can also get darker woods like in the 530i, and there's also aluminium and piano black options on hand too. The material quality, starting with these beautiful leather seats and also the soft leather steering wheel that sits in front of you, is great, and the cabin is really lifted by the standard fit man-made leather that trims the dash and also the tops of the doors. What's also standard across the entire 5 Series line is this 10-inch touchscreen that runs BMW's iDrive 6 system. That's quite a big deal because it introduces a touchscreen to iDrive for the first time, so you can use it by touching it. You have the standard BMW rotary dial between the seats, which in this car is trimmed in a ceramic finish, which is really lovely. And you can also control this system with gestures, so to turn up the volume, all you do is move your finger in a circular motion like that, and it actually works pretty well. And in front of you, you've got perhaps one of the most underutilized digital driver's displays I've seen. It does look really nice and it's really crisp, but you can't do anything like put a map in the center, which is a bit of a shame. The 5 Series comes with a really great 16-speaker, 600-watt Harman Kardon stereo at the 530 level, and it does sound good, but if you like your music, you want to splash out on the absolutely superb Bowers & Wilkins, still 16-speaker, but 1,400-watt stereo. It's one of the best sounding stereos I've ever heard in a car. It does cost over $6,000, so you'll need a pile of cash to burn, but I actually think that might be a worthwhile option in this car. It's also fairly practical. You get 2 decent sized cup holders here, a useful tray ahead of those, a fairly shallow center box where you'll find the car's USB port, and there's also good sized door bins too for stashing a water bottle. Previous generations of the 5 Series, especially the classic E39 of the late 90s, were pretty tiny in the back seat. But in the current iteration of the car, that really couldn't be further from the truth. It's very generous back here. There is a bit of a hump in the floor, so you'll want to keep it to 2 people most of the time, but if you do that, your backseat passengers will really appreciate the generous headroom, the good legroom, and in fact the good tow room as well. And to be honest, it isn't that far off a short wheelbase 7 Series back here. You've also got a number of good amenities, so there's available 4-zone climate control and rear seat heating, which is pretty lush. There are these built-in sunshades for the rear windows, a pull-down center armrest, which does have a pair of cup holders. That's where you really find the biggest difference to the 7 Series, where you get a cool tablet here instead. And there's also okay sized door bins. It's at the 530 level that a kick to open and close tailgate becomes standard fit on the BMW 5 Series. It opens quickly and it reveals a generous boot. At 530 litres, it's actually 10 litres bigger than what you get on the Mercedes-Benz E-Class sedan. The shape is perhaps a tiny bit awkward, but at least it is nice and square. The lip isn't too massive, so you can pop your suitcases in there with ease. In terms of features, it's okay. So there's a net over to the left-hand side, 12-volt socket on the right, and helpfully you have these pull tabs here which release the folding rear seats, and they fold in a 60/40 configuration. But if you want a 5 Series and you need to put a lot of stuff into it regularly, you'll want to wait for the 5 Series Touring, which is the station wagon version of this car. That's almost ready to arrive here in Australia. Unlike the X5 and the X3 SUVs, the 5 Series Touring is actually made in Germany. So if you want sort of the finest built BMW that's made for practicality, you'll want to wait for that 5 Series Touring. But what's the new 5 Series like to drive? Let's start in the 530D by talking about something this pair has in common, a focus on comfort. First off, if you're expecting the new 5 Series, at least in the 530D luxury line, to be a bit of a sports car and executive body because you're sitting behind that BMW Roundel, then you might be a little bit disappointed. That's because I think the focus of the 5 Series range has really changed from generation to generation here. Whereas even the previous F10 felt a little bit like that, a little bit of the spirit of the 3 Series in the larger 5 Series body. I think that's actually switched. The G35 Series feels more like a 7 Series than ever before, made a little bit smaller. But if you were thinking about a 7 Series because you want a BMW with sort of peak refinement, you may not need to worry. You may be able to save yourself quite a significant sum and settle for a 5 Series because it really is that refined. But what is it that we're dealing with here? Well, the 530D is the 6-cylinder diesel of the range. It has 195 kilowatts of power, and of course the more impressive number is the 620 newton meters of torque, and that's available from pretty low, about 2000 RPM. And it's in fact so much torque that it will easily overwhelm the rear wheels from a standing start. And because the new M5 is going to have even more torque, it's clear to see why that car really did require all-wheel drive at this point. And what about when you do find a set of corners? Well, the steering feel, to be upfront, it isn't really there. And it's not really there in either comfort mode or in sport mode. But in sport, it's not very feelsome and it also becomes artificially heavy. So I found myself leaving the steering plus most of the other settings in comfort mode for my week with the 530D. At least there it feels light. It makes the 5 Series feel a little bit agile for a car of this size. It certainly can corner. The G30 is blessed with a really lovely chassis underneath. It's just that at least with the dampers that you get on the luxury line, it feels sort of to pitch and yaw a little bit in the corners more than you'd expect a BMW 5 Series to do. Going for the M Sport line does fix this partially because you get different M Sport dampers, but as this car is set up, it feels very much designed for comfort, refinement and cruising rather than corner carving. It can do it, it just doesn't feel like its absolute favorite activity. Compared to the 530i, why would you buy the 530D and spend quite a bit more money? Well, I think you would if you have a rural property, for example. If you do a lot of country miles, then you'll really be able to take advantage of that massive pool of torque in this car and really get the legs out of it. You really benefit from the country fuel economy, which is really low, like in the high 5 litre per 100 kilometre range. And you'll just really enjoy that touring focus, I think, of the 530D. But if you're going to use the car mostly in town, to be honest, I'd probably save my money and take that 530i, simply because that 11 grand, it buys a lot of petrol and the fuel economy difference isn't actually that massive. I found that this big 6 in town returned about 9 litres per 100 kilometres and the 530i really only about 10. So as you can see, we're sort of splitting hairs there. In contrast, the 530i feels a lot lighter and more agile than the 530D, and of course it is, because it's got 2 less cylinders and it's got a lighter petrol engine underneath the bonnet. So that means that it feels a lot more keen to be put on its toes through fast corners than I found the 530D to be. By no means is this a really out-and-out sports car or anything. The 5 Series still feels like a comfortable and refined limo with the 30i engine. It's just that if you're into sportier driving, then you'll be happier with this model than I think you'd be with the 530D. So what do you get under the bonnet? It's a 2-litre turbo 4-cylinder engine, single turbo but twin scroll, making 185 kilowatts of power and 350 newton meters of torque. So it's obviously way down on torque compared to the 530D, which has 620 newton meters, but honestly, you don't feel shortchanged. It gets up and goes nicely, and the 530i has this really sweet mid-range in contrast to the 530D's absolutely ferocious low end. So it doesn't spin its wheels quite as massively off the line as the 530D does, but instead you just get this nice gradual power heading out of bends in the 530i, which I think actually suits the car a bit better anyway. A lot of other things about this 530i are the same as the brown 530D. The ride quality is very, very similar because they're both luxury line cars and they both have optional 20-inch wheels, which kind of ruin the Serenity a bit because they thump in and out of potholes. My best advice would be to go for smaller 18 or 19-inch wheels to really enjoy how comfortable this car can be. However, it's so quiet, just like the diesel, but even more so because the engine is also really silky and quiet in the 530i. You really do hear almost nothing in the cabin, and you can sit back in these beautiful seats and just cruise. The difference is, although you can cruise in both, it's really the 530i that feels like it wants to be punted down a back road if you find the time. So those are my thoughts on two choices from the new BMW 5 Series lineup. Both 530 models, the 4-cylinder petrol I and the 6-cylinder diesel D, are more about comfort than sporty dynamics these days, but there are clear differences between this pair. The diesel is the consummate big bruiser, offering the huge torque shove and great touring legs that make it perfect for rural drivers. Its petrol sibling feels almost as nippy at town speeds, and its much lighter and more nimble front end makes the 530i the more fun to drive of this pair. Everything else, specification and character-wise, is effectively the same. So there's your choice: touring comfort in the diesel or something closer to old-school BMW dynamism in the petrol. Either way, it's hard to go wrong with this excellent mid-size luxury sedan.